She called me a coward, not to my face. If she had, I might have answered. She said it to my chamberlain in the corridor outside the library, in the calm, practical voice people use when they think they are saying something ordinary. The eastern wall is damp. The winter stores are low. The king is a coward. I was on the other side of the wall when she said it. I had been standing there for 6 minutes. I would like to tell you I left at once. I would like to tell you I heard the word, understood it, and had enough pride to spare myself the rest. I stayed. That is where this begins, with me standing in shadow like a thief in my own hall, listening to a woman say the one thing no man in my court had ever said to me, and live. The corridor outside the library is narrow by palace standards. 2 people can pass there without touching, but not by much. The stone sweats in winter. The torches burn low because I prefer dim light in that part of the castle. Men speak less when they cannot fully see one another. I had ordered my chamberlain to send her away at the 9th bell. She was still there after the 10th. This had become a habit with her. So had my pretending to object to it. You should understand something about me before I tell you what she said next. I was not a man given to hesitation. I had signed death warrants between courses at supper. I had ended border disputes with less thought than most men give to buying boots. My strength, if you wish to call it that, was never mercy. It was clarity. I saw the line. I stepped over it. I kept walking. Then she arrived. And all at once, I found myself standing very still in doorways. I told myself this was vigilance. It was not vigilance. She had come to Vorn for the archives. That was the official version, and it happened to be true. She was better with records than any scholar in the eastern provinces. She could find rot in a ledger the way a hunter finds tracks in snow. She read quickly, remembered everything, and treated every document as if it mattered. What unsettled me was not her intelligence. I had known intelligent people. I employed them. Some I had buried. What unsettled me was the way she behaved around power. Most people adjusted themselves when I entered a room. Their backs changed. Their hands changed. Their voices changed. Even brave men looked as if they were waiting to be struck. She did not. She looked at me as if I were part of the room, important perhaps, structural certainly, but still a thing that could be examined. The first time I noticed it, I disliked her for it. The second time, I waited to see if she would do it again. By the 5th, I was walking out of my way for the privilege of being irritated. That evening, I had gone to the library because I knew she was there. You may call that pathetic if you like. I have called it worse. I heard their voices before. I turned the corner. My chamberlain's first, hers after. He was saying, very carefully, that the hour was late. She answered, very carefully, that she could tell time. He said the king had given instructions. She said, the king gives many instructions. Some of them even make sense. There was a pause after that. A dangerous one. My chamberlain was a cautious man, but not a witless one. He knew insolence when he heard it. He also knew I had let far stranger things pass where she was concerned. Then he asked in the tone of a man stepping onto uncertain ice why she insisted on testing my patience. And she said it. She said, because he doesn't have patience. He has distance. They're not the same thing. My hand went flat against the stone. She went on. I know what patient men look like, she said. They stay. They listen. They answer. He leaves before anything real can begin. That isn't discipline. That's cowardice. My chamberlain made a sound then, not a word, more the sound a man makes when he sees a carriage wheel coming loose and knows there is no use shouting. I should have stepped into the corridor. That is the important part. Not that she called me a coward, not even that she was right. It is that I could have walked forward, spoken my name into the silence, watched whatever color remained in her face disappear, and forced the moment into some safer shape. I did not do that. I stayed where I was and listened. There are kinds of humiliation that come from other people, public ones, loud ones. They pass. This was not that kind. This was the quieter kind, hearing the truth in someone else's mouth, before you have had the nerve to say it in your own. My chamberlain recovered first. He said she was speaking of matters beyond her station. She said, "No, I am speaking of a man who would rather rule a room than remain in it." I remember that sentence with unusual clarity. I have remembered it too often. Would rather rule a room than remain in it. A great deal of my life reduced to one line in a cold corridor. I told you before that I was not a hesitant man. That was true in war. It was true in judgment. It was true in every part of my life where the cost could be measured in bodies, grain, coin, land. What I had no practice in was staying where I could be known. That requires a different sort of courage. She did not know I was there. That is why she said it plainly. She was not trying to wound me. That would have been simpler to bear. She was trying to explain me, and she did. At some point, my chamberlain said he would return in 5 minutes, and if she was still in the library, he would have the guards extinguish the fire and close the room. She told him that if he did that, she would simply come back tomorrow and continue being correct. Then she laughed. I had heard her laugh before, never like that, not guarded, not polite. A real laugh, low and brief and alive. I almost stepped out then, not because I was angry, because I wanted to see her face when she said such things. That is a worse confession than the first one. In the end, I heard my chamberlain leave. I heard the library door open. I heard the dry rustle of paper as she moved inside. And still, I remained where I was, one hand on the stone, like a man considering whether to enter a room that might alter the rest of his life. Perhaps I knew even then that it would. After a while, I followed her in, not at once. That would have made it obvious. I gave it time, enough to pretend, to myself, if not to anyone else, that I had only just arrived. She was seated at the long table by the fire, with 3 ledgers open around her. There was ink on the side of her hand. One candle had burned low enough to drown its own wick. She looked up when I entered. If she was startled, she hid it. No one had ever taught her the right kind of fear. "You are still here," I said. It was a poor opening, but it was the one I had. She looked at the ledgers, then at the window, where the dark had already settled fully beyond the glass. "It appears so," she said. That was the whole exchange. And yet the room felt altered by it. I had heard what she said. She did not know I had heard. The knowledge sat between us, invisible and complete. I should have addressed it. I did not. I asked what she had found in the grain records. She answered, calmly, thoroughly. She showed me 2 copied entries, one discrepancy in winter allotments, and a pattern that would have escaped every man on my council, because none of them had ever learned to read for what was missing. I listened. I even asked a question or two. If you had walked into the library at that moment, You would have seen a king and a scholar discussing ledgers by the fire. You would not have seen the wall between us. You would not have known I was still standing on the wrong side of it. When she finished, she waited, perhaps for praise, perhaps for objection, perhaps for the answer I should have given in the corridor, and failed to. What I said was, "You may remain another hour." It was the language of a coward, not because it was cruel, because it was small. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once and looked back down at the page. I left. Of course I did. That was my talent then. Leave before the room asks too much of you. Leave before silence becomes an answer. Leave before a woman with ink on her hand can look at you long enough to make you aware of yourself. I went back to my study. The fire there had burned almost out. I did not ring for more wood. I sat with the cold and heard her sentence over and over again until the words stopped sounding like an accusation and began sounding like a fact. Would rather rule a room than remain in it. She was right. She was right before I was brave enough to know it. That is what I remember most clearly now. Not the insult, not even the shame, the certainty. She said it as if she had simply found the correct line in a damaged record, and perhaps she had. I saw her the next day, and the day after that. I spoke to her about ledgers, road levies, a damaged tax register from the Northern Reach. I spoke to her about everything, except the one sentence that had lodged itself under my ribs and remained there. I never told her I had heard it. Not then. Perhaps not ever in any way that mattered. But from that night on, whenever I left a room she was in, I knew exactly what she would have called it. And the worst part, the part that still has teeth, is that I began from that night on to stay a little longer, not long enough, just long enough to know she was right.